always try to find a way to be an asset to people, not a liability on their time. Something that no one taught me, and I kind of figured it out. If you get the chance to get 30 minutes with anybody, ask the question, what's keeping you up at night? What are your challenges? What do you need? And then find a way to solve that, because the people who do that are the ones that stand out.
I'm Detavio Samuels, CEO of REVOLT, and this is the Blackprint, the show that dives into the blueprint for Black success. Every episode, I sit down with talented CEOs, entrepreneurs, and industry experts to explore their journeys to the top. This is the Blackprint. And my audience knows, I don't ever introduce my guests. At REVOLT, we believe everyone should control their own narrative. And so my first question to you is, can you please introduce yourself to our audience?
100%.
Let the people know who you is.
Well, I'm Melissa Proctor. When I was born, I was Melissa Marie McGee, so they call me First and foremost, I'm Marley's mom. It's my 10-year-old daughter, but I'm also the Chief Marketing Officer for the Atlanta Hawks and State Farm Arena here in Atlanta, Georgia.
Fantastic. What an amazing accomplishment for anybody to be in that seat. But for you to get there, not only as a woman, but a Black woman. So I can't wait to hear about your journey. So now we know where you are. Let's take it all the way back to the beginning, right? Tell me about what life was like for you growing up as a child.
Yeah, sure. I was born and raised in Miami, Florida in the 80s. It was real colorful. But my mother was from Belize originally, and my father's from Jamaica. So I was first generation born here in the United States. And it was always a really interesting position to be in because my parents knew nothing American. So there was no American sports, no football, no baseball. Like, we were not that family. My father did like wrestling. That was his one thing. He was a big wrestling fan. But growing up, I would spend every summer either in Belize or Jamaica, visiting family. No, nothing fancy, no, resorts or anything like that. And I hated it when I was younger, but I've so grown to appreciate it as I've gotten older. But, during those trips and during elementary school and middle school, I found a passion for art. And so I was really, really into art and drawing, and I think I was in kindergarten or something, and I did a test. And whatever I was doing, in between time I was sketching. And the person administering the test told my mom, she's like, Melissa's good, but she really loves art. You need to nurture her in that. And I'm so grateful my mother did. And so I was able to go to a magnet art school in Miami for middle school, Southwood Middle, to focus on fine arts and visual arts. And then for high school, I was able to go to this amazing school called Design and Architecture Senior High. It was a charter school where you could focus on architecture, interior design, industrial fashion, whichever, right? And they had a graphic design major with like a Mac lab. And this was a big deal, back in the 90s. And so I got to really be a graphic designer in high school and work. But while I did all that, I ended up finding a passion in watching basketball with one of my cousins on TV. She was a Miami Heat fan. I knew nothing of the sport. And I started watching it with her like a soap opera. And then I fell in love with sports.
Okay, you talk about being first generation born. I am as well. My father's Jamaican, so I'm first generation. On the show, we've had a lot of people who were either born outside of the country or born or come from a, what they call foundational Black, typical Black background. You may be the first one that's first generation born. Do you see a difference between your upbringing, your life, and maybe what you might have seen from some of your Black counterparts that had different backgrounds?
100%. And for me, it was always really interesting because I was never Black enough for the Black folk growing up in the hood in Miami. And where I grew up, it was a middle class, neighborhood, but, drug dealers on one side, Section 8 houses on the other side. And when I went to school, they were like, why you talk so proper? My father, like, you speaking the Queen's English. Like, it was very specific. And so for me, it was always kind of riding this line of, this is just how I was raised, drink tea every morning. And, there were other things culturally where friends would be like, oh, y'all don't eat grits. And I was like, I didn't have a grit till I went to college in the South. Like, I didn't know what that was. We had cream of wheat and it was just porridge. It was a very different day-to-day experience when I went home. But when I was outside, people automatically put me in one bucket. And so it was always interesting because I felt like I learned how to navigate many different spaces. And later on in my career, I ended up traveling more and working in London and doing other things. But I really think that became my superpower in terms of marketing and being able to understand people from different cultures and really get to know their why.
You also talked about this notion of like You're going to school for things that feel like more of the visual arts, architecture, fashion, that type of a thing, but learn like this budding love for basketball. When you go back to high school, Melissa, was her dream about graphic design and visual arts, or was her dream around basketball and sports?
I think her dream was to, become a functioning citizen and make enough money to live. When I was 12, my parents got divorced. And my mother was a registered nurse, RN. She went to nursing school in England, and I would hear her talk about her time in New York and her friends. And I had never been to Europe growing up as a kid, but I always heard about it. And coming from Belize, it's colonized by the British, so it was a very natural thing. A lot of people went to England, came back. And so I always remember hearing that, and I'm like, man, one day I want to be able to go there. It seemed like some faraway land, And throughout, my life, she was working double, triple shifts. My father sorted checks at a bank. He was a computer programmer. But at the time, Coconut Grove Bank, it was a very different world. And so I saw them and I was like, I don't know what I'm gonna be, but I knew I wanted to be something, whatever that meant. My father told me to be a physical therapist because I always have a job. It was very practical, just get a job and that's it. But when I was 15, I had done an internship one summer with the Miami Herald newspaper. And I did graphic design for this magazine we had to put together. And they liked me so much. They were like, oh, you should come back and, volunteer. And I ended up getting a job as a graphic designer for the Miami Herald. And in high school, it was like, oh, that's a big deal. But I was doing it. And I was like, I can't do this every day for the rest of my life. But then I was like, I wanted to get a real job. And I asked my mom, I was like, well, can I get a job? And she said, you can only get a job in whatever you want to do for the rest of your life. And I knew at that time, I didn't want to be a struggling artist, because I also knew a number of kids that went to my school who, were artists, they were trying to make ends meet. And so at the time, I started watching basketball with my cousin, Su Yen, and I was like, Mom, you know what? I want to get a job in the NBA. I'm going to become the first female coach in the NBA. That. And my mom was like, cool, go get a job in the NBA. She had no idea what the NBA even stood for. She didn't know. But she laid down the gauntlet, and I loved it because it gave me no alternative. There was no plan B. It was like, that's what you want to do? Go do that. And so I started writing letters and making phone calls. It was like the white pages back in the day. There was no website to check out, and I didn't know. I called, I think I got in touch with, I want to say it was community relations. And they were like, hey, we have no jobs for kids, try the equipment manager. Called the equipment manager, this guy named Jay Sable. It was awesome. And he was like, I don't know what you would do. We only have ball boys. And I was like, all right. He's like, well, give us some time. So I kept calling. I think every 2-3 days I would go to the little office at the school with a phone and I would call. And then one day he said, if you call me one more time, I'm never gonna call you back. Please stop calling. So I started writing letters, and I would write letters and I would draw on the envelopes. I'd draw Heat logos. I'd draw pictures of Alonzo Mourning and Tim Hardaway. And then one day I called and he was just like, he tried to discourage me. He's like, this is grunge work. You mop sweat, you fold towels, you come in early, you stay late. You gotta have good grades. Oh, and by the way, it doesn't pay, because it wasn't a paying job. You weren't on payroll. They get tips at the end of the night from the visiting team. And I was like, I didn't care. And so finally one day he called me back and he said, I got your letters, got all your messages. Would love for you to just come to a preseason game. And I had realized at that time I'd never been to a professional sporting event.
What?
I always went to art school. So middle school, I wasn't in any athletics. High school didn't even have teams. And so I went, and it was like seeing TV in real life for me. And it was my first game. It was a preseason game. I remember they gave me an outfit. And I was like, ooh, I got a champion outfit, some Reeboks. And it was really awesome. And they said, go rebound. And I had no idea how to rebound, because I had never even played basketball before.
You don't even play sports?
Never even played.
You don't watch, you've never been to a game?
Nope. Watch it on TV as a fan. But it was probably one of the best jobs I've ever had in my life. And that day I hustled. I learned quickly. And there were some other ball boys who were like, oh, we got a girl, let's sew her the ropes. And they were showing me how to get with the players and try to carry their bags to the bus and, ask for shoes and get them autographed and this whole nine. It was like a whole other world. But I loved it. The only thing was, back then there were no female referees. I couldn't go in the locker room. There was none of that. And so I learned early on how to make myself necessary on the court. And I would be helping the assistant coaches set picks and run plays when players are doing shoot around. I would learn how to pass properly. I had players teaching me how to shoot. And it was great. And Pat Riley was a head coach at the time. And on game days, I would pick up all his plays and I had a little binder at home, and I don't know what I was collecting, but it was in my mind. the path to becoming the first female coach in the NBA, because that was the goal.
I think it's so impressive. You have this goal to be the first female coach of the NBA, and you are fighting, warring as a young teenager to become a ball girl. What is it about that position that made you, because a lot of people just say, look, it doesn't pay, they're not answering my calls, that's not even the role that gets you to be a head coach. What was it that made you keep fighting and pushing for that role?
First of all, there were no roles. So the fact that didn't even exist. They actually ended up changing the term to team attendant once I started to be politically correct, because they only had ball boys.
You were the first ball
girl. There were no girls.
Right.
And matter of fact, when I started, the team owner's daughter saw me on the court and said, hey, she was there, her brother was a ball boy. So she ended up joining me on the court. So we became the first ball girls together.
Beautiful.
But there was no alternative. My mom, that was it. Like I said, this is what I want to do. She's like, okay, go do it. And I was just so grateful to have the opportunity to be like a physical witness to the thing that I love so much on television, that it was just cool at the time to be able to even go to games and not pay money and sit right behind the basket. And this was when, the Bulls were it. And I'm watching Dennis Rodman, who was my favorite player at the time, and Michael Jordan playing. Like, it was such an amazing time in the NBA. But to be able to have a front seat to all of that and just learn was phenomenal. And behind me was Magic Johnson and Sylvester Stallone, and I'm meeting owners of teams. Like, at 15, 16 years old, I had no idea the world that I was walking into. But I learned so much.
And you learned a lot, not just because of the opportunity that was given, but it also sounds like because of the opportunity that was taken, right? So I hear you talk about, like, I'm looking at the plays, I'm helping people, I'm learning how to add value on the court from whatever seat. Where did you get that wisdom? How did you know that, like, I'm gonna walk into this space and make this move, but I'm gonna get what I need out of it? I'm going to create value so much that they can't let me go, that they can't, like, what gave you like that idea?
I don't know if it was ever that intentional. I think my mother is very much, like I said, she was a nurse. It was on servant leadership. How are you helpful to others? Like, and that was always my nature, still to this day. Like, I want to be of service, even for my team at the Hawks. I'm like, how can I help you or leave this world better than it was when I found it, or leave you better than you were before you met me? And so it was some of that energy, but then coming in, I was like, I just want to be useful. And so knowing that I couldn't do a lot of what the guys could do, I was like, you know what, I'm gonna be out here and I'm gonna make this the best job ever. So they used to call me, this is the living single days. They used to call me Queen for Queen Latifah, because I remind everybody of Queen Latifah.
Okay.
And so I'd be out there, they're like, hey Queen, come rebound for me. Like, when it started players by request. And then they learned that I did art. And so some players wanted to buy pieces of my artwork. Like, it became this really interesting, and the Heat are very much like a family. And so getting to know the ownership group, getting to know the people, the same security guards that were on the court when I was in high school are still there today.
Wow.
I went to a game, I think last year, and they're like, oh my gosh, it's Melissa. And so that was cool, but back then it was just like, how can I be a support in this cast of characters that are putting on these games, so frequently throughout the season? And everyone had a role, and it was very clear, like, this is your role, and when you do well, you got tips. So it did pay-ish, but very different than I probably would have anticipated.
Yeah. There were so many opportunities for you to shrink.
Yeah.
I mean, like, there was no job. It didn't exist for young girls or women. You forced and you created that. Once you forced and created that space, you can't get into the locker room. You can't do it an opportunity to shrink. No, you find ways to expand. I think it is such a brilliant lesson for our audience that we take the opportunities that we are granted and given, and regardless of how small they might be, you make them into the biggest opportunity that you can. I love that part of your story. Okay, so now you're 15, 16, 17, high school, working as a ball girl, first ball girl for the Miami Heat. You have this dream about being the first woman basketball coach, NBA basketball coach. How do you take that into your college experience? Did you look for a school that was specifically focused in sports? Like, what's the next step for you?
Yeah, we ain't had no money, so that was not the direction.
Okay.
It was funny because a lot of my friends are going to FIT, Pratt, Parsons, like art schools. It was an art high school. And I was like, I want to go to a school where I can get a good degree, so I can get a job. That was always it. I don't want to be a struggling artist. Although I was an artist at the time, and I actually had an agent that was helping manage me, a lawyer doing contracts. I started doing gallery exhibitions.
Oh, wow.
So the natural desire was like, oh, she should go into art. But what I did was I started applying to different schools. And actually through working at the Heat, a young lady on the court went to Wake Forest. I didn't know what Wake Forest was. This was, way back you had those college booklets. You had to go through the whole book to see what schools existed and where they were. This was way back, and you had to like apply and then get a brochure that comes to your house so you can see it. And so she talked about Wake, and the things she said, she's like, Melissa, I was working at the Heat. I was still helping out at the Miami Herald sometimes. I volunteered with the University of Miami women's basketball team. My mom was a nurse, and because of that, I had to go help out at the hospital sometimes. So I was a candy striper. I was doing all types of work. And she said, Wake is a great school, but their mantra is pro humanitate, and it's for humanity. Just the way you carry yourself, the way you help around here, the way you do stuff in the community. They don't look at just test scores, and I was not the best test taker. She was like, really look at the whole person, and I think you would be great at Wake. Never even crossed my mind, didn't know anything about it. I applied, and what I respected about Wake Forest, and the reason why I ended up going there, was that they had art scholarships. But in order to get it, you had to fly to Winston-Salem. You had to interview with the entire art department, once they looked at your application, looked at your work. And then you had to live on campus for 2 days with a student who also had the scholarship to see what the world was like. And so it's like they are trying you out, you try them out. And I felt like I really had to prove myself. So I flew to Winston, did the whole interview. Didn't see any Black people initially. I think my last day, I got friends who were like, I remember you walking around being like, where are the Black people? So finally met them.
Okay.
And then when I came back, they offered me the scholarship. It was like 75%. And it was such a cool space. And I'm born and raised in Miami. Miami's all diversity. I thought I knew diversity until I went to Winston-Salem. There were people on my hall freshman who'd never seen a Black person in their life, never had a conversation. It was, let me touch your hair. And I was like, wow, what is this? But out of cultural curiosity, it was such a different experience. I loved it. And I really thought that going from Miami and having an experience like going to Wake would help me in my life in some way, and it absolutely did.
In what ways? Talk to me about the ways in which going to Wake Forest in particular helped you.
First of all, in the South, or at least in North Carolina, I mean, you know about North Carolina too, I didn't know that Wake was so prestigious.
Absolutely.
I didn't, coming from Miami, I had no idea. So like, ACC, big school, small school, big reputation at the time. Tim Duncan, I think, was about to graduate when I got there. And so it was a very different world, but it probably prepared me most for what I deal with every day in corporate America in terms of the people that I'm around, how to navigate certain scenarios, how to be the only. In some classes I was. Maya Angelou was a professor at Wake at the time. I got to take her class, which was really cool. But coming from Miami and having that experience, I think just the duality of that world kind of prepared me so much for everything else.
What would you say to anybody watching this interview right now that's sitting between a decision that sounds like what you know and what is comfortable and what is existing versus the fear of the unknown or that unknown opportunity? What would you say to them about how to make this decision that they may be contemplating? I mean,
I feel like there's so many other factors that would go into that, but lately, literally like last week, faith over fear. I was talking to one of my mentors, and that's it, because it's so easy to stay in a comfort zone. I ended up creating what I call my guiding principles. And I wrote about it in my book, but I had mentors that talked about the power of guiding principles. Like, what are the things that help drive you? And I realized sometimes you can have a decision and just allow all these other things to help. It's like, what's most important to you in your life? What are your non-negotiables? And so after defining those things for myself, I put that up as a filter to anything that comes my way. Because once I do that, it's kind of like, I'll be okay. If it's not gonna kill me, if my family's gonna be all right, if I can eat, I can try something new, it's gonna be okay. But for me, having that gives me comfort, because it always puts the big thing, the most important thing in perspective, where sometimes your fear can override even what the most important thing is, and you're like, it's easy. And one of my guiding principles is I get bored really easily. So if I can do something in my sleep, I don't need to do it. And for me, that's the difference, because I've been in roles where I'm like, you know what? I'm not growing anymore. I'm not learning. It's time to make a shift. And for me, that's one of my decision factors.
Do you know the principles off the top of your head?
Always.
Okay, can you let me know what they are?
For sure. So the very first one is, I know that I've had creative jobs where I was a designer. I've had jobs where I was all strategic, business strategy. Both of those were not my jam. I am my best when I can put those two things together, because I'm creative and I'm a strategist. So to me, that's my superpower. My second is, because I get bored easily, I know that I have to do something where I'm continuously growing and developing. And so it's always never just resting, doing it in my sleep, don't do it. So that's absolutely number two. Number three, my mom was not that great with money growing up. So I learned, we had bill collectors and people calling and stuff shut off. And I was like, I know whatever I did, I wanted to be able to pay my bills on time. That was the first goal. Then or maybe ahead of time. That was wild. And then after I had my daughter, the idea of generational wealth became really important. So I don't need to be rich. I don't need to be driving, crazy cars, but I just want to be able to help the future, my family. My fourth, I don't think there's any such thing as work-life balance. People say that. I'm like, it's harmony. Sometimes I got to work hard. Sometimes I got to live hard. But having the flexibility to do either one is most important is really what drives me. So I took my daughter to Japan last summer because she's really into anime. That was amazing to have the opportunity to do that, know that I have a great team that can, do their work and I can support them when they have to go do their thing. That idea of work-life harmony, critical. Then my final one is authenticity. So how I'm talking to you is how I talk to my team, is how I talk to my boss, is how I talk to my kid. I don't code switch, I don't deviate. Like what you see is what you get.
Yeah.
So wherever I am, if I can't be my full self and bring all of me, then I don't need to be there.
Right.
But those are my guiding principles.
I love that. I think a lot today about how we make decisions. And I think a lot of times we want to make decisions based on data, but we live in a moment in time where there's so much data. You can take any data that you find and tell any story that you want.
100%.
And so in a world where you can't always trust the story because we've synthesized data in the way that we want, how do you make decisions? And I think that we're in one of those moments in time where our principles and our values have to be the guiding light for how we make decisions, right? Because the data and the storytelling that we're getting from other people can be a little funky, So love that you have that. Okay, so you're at Wake Forest. I heard a lot about, we're still doing kind of like the visual arts thing, right? How are you processing and thinking about, again, this dream to be the first coach in the NBA?
So Wake was great academically. I learned a lot, but every summer I would go back home to Miami and I'd volunteer with the Heat. So I still wanted to be connected to basketball. I was a equipment manager for the women's basketball team at Wake, the football team my freshman year. But every summer it was, how do I help out with the draft, free agency, and putting together scouting reports? During one of those summers, I remember talking to one of that's an alumni from the Heat. And I was telling him, one day I'm gonna be a coach. And he was like, have you ever played? And I was like, well, nah, I started a little, club in high school and, I play at the court by the house. And he was just like, well, if you're serious about coaching.
Right.
And then I realized, I was like, I'm probably not that serious about coaching, but I was serious about my passion for basketball. And so I was like, it was, I would say it's pivotal, but at the time there was so many things that I was kind of receiving. And I said, you know what? You're right. I got these other skills and abilities, but I want to be around basketball. So I don't think it shifted from, I don't ever want to be a coach. It was more around, I still want to be around the game of basketball, but there's so many roles. And in being there every summer, they launched the WNBA team, the Miami Soul, was short-lived. I got to help launch that. They had female referees for that. So I got to be the one teaching the other people what to do because I had experience. And so all of those things combined, kind of my senior year came to a head because I knew that I wanted to work in basketball, so I applied for a management training program at the NBA's headquarters. And it was so funny. I had Pat Riley and Alonzo Mourning writing me letters of recommendation.
Nice.
And they were like, you write the letter, I'll sign it. I was like, cool, that works. I applied, I came, they interviewed me. They said, you come highly recommended. We love everything you said. I did this great interview. And they're like, but we're a business and you are too creative for us. So we're not going to allow you to come and do this internship program. It was at their headquarters in Secaucus, New Jersey. And I was crushed because that was my opportunity. And to that point, I would try out for stuff and go after it, be persistent, and I got it. And that was the no, door closed, so sorry. As my backup, like all college students, like, this don't work out, I'll just stay in school. I'll get a little master's, do my thing. And I applied to stay at Wake. I was a communications major and a studio art minor. Comm department, I was a TA, professors loved me, the dean loved me, so I went and did the interview, applied, and they interviewed me, and they're like, Melissa, we love you. I'm like, yeah, I know, it's me. They were like, we feel like you're using this as a crutch, and we don't want to give you anything to fall back on.
Wow.
So we're going to deny you the opportunity to stay here.
Wow.
Because we think you're destined for bigger and better things. And I was like, this is wild. Like, later on, I knew that the NBA stood for nothing but attorneys. And at the time, it was very much a business based on licensing and rights, which is very much is today. And so I was like, I got it for that time. For Wake Forest, I was so grateful. At the time, I was so upset. I was pissed off. I was like, what do you mean? but I didn't know what to do next. And so one of the assistants, it was an admin named Beth Hutchins in the Wake Forest Communications Department, said, Melissa, I saw this thing that came in the mail. I thought about you. And it was an application for a program called T3. They called it the Turner Trainee Team. And it was, hey, and all it said was send us your talent in a project. No other information, didn't know what it was, but it was for an internship in Atlanta, Georgia. I had a cousin that went to Spelman. I came here once for her graduation. She left, moved to New York. I didn't know anyone in Atlanta, but that brief intrigued me as an artist or creative. And so I looked at it, I did research, didn't know what Turner was, coming from Miami.
Sure.
And I was like, oh, CNN, oh, Cartoon Network, TBS, TNT, cool. So I ended up putting together a magazine and I produced it. I called it T3 TV Guide. And I made a TV guide and it was all about myself. And it was me as a Cleopatra in a Turner Classic Movie ad. It was me as a ball girl on an NBA and TNT ad. I had samples of my artwork in it. I had writing samples. I had my resume. I made myself a Powerpuff Girl. So it was black Powerpuff Girl and I got size 11 shoes. So I have a big heart and all these things. So they got to know a little bit about me. And I submitted it and I was so proud of that magazine. I was like, even if I don't get this job, this is like putting together the dopest resume I'd ever seen. And I shared it with some people at Wake in the library, the printing department. They printed it for free because they were so impressed. I think I made like 10 copies. I ended up getting a call back from TNT Marketing. And TNT said, hey, come in and do an interview. So I came to Atlanta, did the interview. And they said, you sold yourself so well to us. We think you would do an amazing job of selling our content to consumers. And that's how I got my first job in marketing as a marketing intern in TNT. And I'd never taken a marketing class in college, but it was so innate, just kind of from that creative and that strategic perspective. And so while I thought I went away from basketball, I kind of went to entertainment, which basketball absolutely is.
Absolutely.
TNT had the NBA on TNT. And so I made very little money as a trainee through this program, called on my old boss from the Heat, said, hey, you know what, on Atlanta? Introduced me. And so I became a ball girl on the court for the Atlanta Hawks, my first year living in Atlanta. It was also the last time the All-Star game was here. So I got to work on the court for that. And then by day, got to work in the office, figuring out how to market to the city of Atlanta around.
So you were doing
All-Star.
marketing and being a ball girl?
Yep. Year one, it was a hustle. It's all about the hustle. You got to put in the work.
Walking into this role, that was a new marketing role, something that you weren't necessarily seeking. It wasn't basketball, but still in entertainment. Were you thinking about ways to separate and differentiate yourself from the rest of the pack then? Such
a good question, because when I started, it's an internship, it's an 11-month internship program, baptism by fire. They just rotate people through it. So there was a young lady who was in an internship before, and she was no longer with the company. So I come in, I was like, hey, what happened to Jen? Who was here? Oh, she wasn't offered a position. So there's no role for you when you finish. And so I said, okay. And I remember meeting with a guy named Scott Saffron. He was the head of marketing at the time. And I said, do you have any advice? And he said, find something to be famous for. Whatever you do, find a way to be an integral part of this team where they need you. And I said, okay. And at the time, there was no one else in the department who looked like me. There were a couple of admins in different, groups who were Black. But other than that, I was the only Black person on my immediate team. And so I came in and my creative was my superpower. They're like, oh, we need a logo. I'll try that. Someone's like, I'm having a party for my kid. I need to find an invitation to design. I'll design that. I was raising my hand to take on the jobs and the projects that nobody else wanted. And ultimately, 6 months into the job, they offered me a full-time role to stay on in marketing. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. No, thank you. And it was wild because I'm like, this should be it.
You rejected it. You turned it down.
I said, no, thank you. And it was cool. But what I learned is most of them were, late 20s, early 30s, started to get married, settle down. And it was such a great environment. And I was like, I feel like I got so much more to do. And I wasn't ready to settle. At the same time I had gotten my internship at TNT in marketing, I had also applied for an art school in London. Central St. Martin's College of Art and Design. Really, I did a semester abroad in undergrad and I loved it, so I wanted to find a way to go back. They accepted me and I deferred admission for a year. So in my head, when they offered me the job, I was like, you know what, I love this, I enjoy this job, but I really want to go explore. So I said, maybe I can find a way to go do this one-year master's program as an excuse really just to live abroad.
Yep.
Then I could come back and try to do that. And so they loved it, they accepted it, they let me stay on. And my internship extended until I went to grad school. They made introductions for me to people in London. Ended up being an intern in corporate responsibility while working at Turner UK. And so I really believe that it was just the openness of, kind of to your point, the faith over fear. I'm like, it's the unknown. I'm quitting a job, a really great job in a great place, in order to go somewhere completely unknown with no guarantee of being able to come back. But ultimately it worked out.
How do you transition this incredible opportunity into the woman that we meet and see now? I think your first role at the Atlanta Hawks was not the position you're in,
No.
right? Okay, what was the first role at the Atlanta Hawks?
The first role at the Atlanta Hawks, well, other than ball girl, when I came back around. So I was at Turner for about 11 years.
That was an 11-year run.
So yeah, so after I went to London and did the graduate degree, I interned at the UK office. I ended up coming back to Atlanta and I got a job doing on-air graphics for TBS and TNT. Still in creative. I went to school for brand strategy for grad school. There were no branding jobs, so I had to do this graphics role. Ultimately, 3 years later, I got a job in brand strategy, helping to rebrand Court TV to True TV. And then about a year and change into that job, the world shifted. I ended up doing some HR kind of work, and it was really very interesting stuff, but not what my strength was. Then I got asked to take on a role in our media group. Anybody who would tap my shoulder, be like, hey, are you interested in this? I would do it. None of these were roles that I applied for. The only role at Turner I applied for was that internship. So everything else was me sitting on the task force, raising my hand. Still the same thing that got me there. It's the same thing I'm doing. And so ultimately at Turner, one of my last roles, I was working Cartoon Network and Adult Swim in business strategy. And they asked me to sit on the task force, so I did it. And as a part of that, they said, hey, we're launching this digital health and wellness brand. Turner didn't have a lot of strength in launching digital brands at the time. And every mentor I had said, do not take that job. And I was like, okay, well, but I've done every other thing. I've worked at every other brand at this point. They're like, do not take that job. And I was like, all right, well, I got to do what's best for me. So I took the job.
Of course, I knew that was coming.
Of course I took the job. I mean, it was such a dope opportunity. And so I learned so much about digital marketing and content strategy and all these things. Took the role. About 6 months after we launched this great new brand, had content on HLN. I was the VP of marketing and content. I think I'd hired a team. It was phenomenal. One CEO left. The CFO of our parent company came in. They were preparing to sell, but no one knew that at the time. And so we were the last business started and the first one cut. At the time, I was 8 months pregnant with my daughter.
Oh, wow.
And they were like, hey, thank you, but we're closing down the entire business unit. Everyone's laid off. And I, at the time, I was like helping Turner recruit talent. And they were like, you can't leave. HR was telling me I couldn't leave. And I was like, well, I ain't got no job. Like, what do you want?
What am I gonna do?
So I had a little bit of severance, but reality was I was going on maternity leave. So right after they let me go, maybe a month later, my daughter was born. And so I had no job for the first time since 15, really. And I was totally okay with it. And I believe that God does interesting things at different times. If I wasn't 8 months pregnant, I probably would have been in a very different mindset. But I was like, look, I got one thing to do right now, so I'm gonna focus on that. And thankfully, I was in a position to be able to focus on that. And so right after I had my daughter, to your Hawks question, I ended up, a friend of mine was like, hey, they got a draft party at the arena every year. They had this big free draft party. He's like, you ain't got no job, it's free. Do you wanna go? I was like, cool. So I go with her to this draft party, jeans, t-shirts, some sneakers, walking around and I see one of my mentors from Turner from when I was a ball girl at the Hawks and an intern. He was the president of TNT. During that internship program, I think every intern met with him. I had a conversation with him, told him about what I was working on. He would sit courtside at every Hawks game. He saw me mopping up sweat that first year. When I was working in brand strategy, doing the rebrand from Court TV to True TV, he was the top of the totem pole. I was like 55 levels down, carrying binders. But he knew me. He knew my name through reputation and the work that I had done. And so he sees me at this party and he's like, oh, Melissa, I heard you had a kid. I said, yeah, had a daughter. It's great. He's like, that's awesome. Would love to introduce you to some people. So he takes me around and introduces me to every C-level executive for the Hawks at that party. Mind you, I'm chilling. I didn't know he was there. We didn't have a conversation about it. And he was just like, yeah, I know you love creative. He saw my magazine. He knew I was an artist, a designer. He's like, I know you love basketball. Knew I was a ball girl. He's like, I might need some help. We're designing a new jersey, a new uniform. I have some guys working on it. We don't have a female perspective. I love just your standpoint as a creative. Would you mind sitting in on some meetings? This is a dream job for anybody, especially someone who loves creative and basketball. I said, absolutely. Sat in on one meeting became 4 meetings, became 5 meetings. And he's like, hey, I think you should consult. Would you be willing to sit in? We're talking about building a brand. I might need some help. Great, started consulting. That was around June, July. By September of that same year, 2014, I came on board to the Hawks as a VP of brand strategy.
Beautiful.
To help build a brand. And that was the beginning of my career with the Atlanta Hawks, part 2.
Yeah. I want to dive into the Atlanta Hawks piece, but first you have to tell me, how in the world were you able to get to peace when you are 8 months pregnant and lost your job? You said it like it's an easy thing, but I'm telling you, anybody else in that situation is flipping all of the way out.
But you can't flip out because you're 8 months pregnant. Like so I had bigger fish to fry. Thankfully, I had like maybe 3 or 4 months of severance. So at least with that, I was like, okay, it's maternity leave that is being paid, so I can figure something out. So I think in my mind, it was like, I'm an only child. I had never had a child. So I was like, I didn't know how to change a diaper. They had to tell me in the hospital. Like, it was a very different experience. And so for me, going through that, it was very much of, you know what, it's gonna be okay, but let's focus on what we need to focus on right now. And I was married at the time. And so I was like, you know, I'm gonna be okay. But that peace really just came from faith. Because ultimately, I'm like, what am I gonna do? There's a reason why this happened. I truly believe everything happens for a reason. And so instead of flipping out about it, I was like, we'll figure out what the next step is gonna be, but right now I need to focus on my daughter. And I'm just grateful because I didn't have time to look for the next step. The next step looked for me.
In this moment in time that we're in, I think there's just so much value in the things that you're saying. I think one, this idea, this opportunity to accept what is. There's so much stuff that is out of our control. The more time we spend.
We control nothing.
100%, right? Like that's, when I was younger, I used to think I could control everything.
Of course.
Now in my age, I think I can control nothing, right? So there's an absolute like surrender to so much of what is out there, right? And then I will try to control my controllables and influence what's there, but there's an absolute surrender to what is out of my control and the things that are out there, right? Yeah. I think that's gonna be super important as we're getting ready to even embark on these next 4 years, right? Okay, so you're stepping back into this new seat, executive at the Atlanta Hawks. What was the first big like achievement, highlight, milestone for you in this job? Because now you're in a space that you wanted to be in. Yeah. Senior position
level,
for an
brand
NBA
strategy.
basketball team.
You know, it's funny, 2 weeks into, I think was consulting, we had a major racial crisis with the Atlanta Hawks, where the previous ownership team said some things. And so it was not a highlight at all. It was actually, you know, probably as soon as I started officially, my first day was sitting in like diversity training. It was completely crisis communications. You know, my CEO came and apologized to me. He had just gotten there. He's like, if I knew this was the kind of organization, I would have never brought you in. I'm like, this wasn't your fault. You know, you didn't know. But we got to work together to try to find a solution. And so one of the things we did was come up with this True to Atlanta brand mantra. And it came from truth in basketball. It was like, how do we have authenticity and transparency and doing the right thing for the city? So hiring the first chief diversity and inclusion officer of any professional sport. Before the NBA had one, we had one. It was, how do we do the right thing by the community? Previous ownership didn't invest in the community. We said we were going to create all these courts and safe places for kids to play, affordable tickets, all these things. And so being able to do that early on was fantastic. After that, you know, my role kept changing. We onboarded new ownership, my role evolved. And so finally I become CMO about 3 years in. And it was a new chief marketing officer. Nike came to me. It was maybe my second week on the job. They were like, hey, we had designed this new city edition. We'd love to know your themes. What would you like to talk about? This is something where we have a conversation and maybe it's about 2 or 3 years after that conversation, the uniform comes out. So it can't be trendy, it can't be today. Something that has to be evergreen, but really meaningful to the city of Atlanta. In my very first meeting, I was like, I want to be able to honor the legacy of Dr. King for more than a day. Because we did great work for every MLK Day game that we had in Atlanta, but it was always a flash in the pan, it was just a game. And so we ended up coming up with the idea of launching the City Edition uniform that had MLK on it. It was probably one of the biggest City Editions we've ever had, launched. The league loved it. The team made it to the Eastern Conference Finals, farthest it's ever made while it's been in Atlanta. The Pope reached out and wanted a jersey, which was wild.
Oh, that's incredible.
So we ended up sending a jersey to the Pope because he was so inspired by what the NBA had done during the summer of 2020 with everything from a social impact standpoint. But then he was also inspired by Dr. King. And so it was the wildest thing I'd ever heard. I'm like, this someone from the Pope, Vatican, can you send you a jersey? Like, what? And then he signed it and everything. And so doing that, and then knowing that 100% of the profits from the jerseys we sold, we gave back to women entrepreneurs in the city of Atlanta. Because a lot of the work Dr. King was doing at the time was how do we have economic parity? And so coming up with that idea and then looking at the whole campaign 360 as a marketer, as a creative, as someone who lives in Atlanta and loves it, was probably one of the most impactful things that I've ever done, but definitely a high point.
I believe we live in this moment in time where brands not only have to make great differentiated products, but they also have to create the world that their audience wants to live in.
Yeah.
And I think we do so much of that through corporate social responsibility, social justice initiatives. I'm amazed that when you talk about kind of like the highlights and the things that you just ran through for your time at the Atlanta Hawks, I'm sure you have great stories, great metrics as it relates to driving traffic, increasing numbers, et cetera. I am amazed that you spent most of the time talking about social responsibility, the impact that you made on the culture, giving back to women entrepreneurs. What is it about this world that is not directly, a lot of people would say that it's not just directly about what a CMO should be doing, driving foot traffic, right? What is it about this world that you think gives energy to the brand? Why do you think this work is important as a CMO outside of just driving foot traffic?
Because it's important to our target audience. Our target is next generation Atlanta. And we know that everyone in the next generation is really the mindset is so different than old school. We're not just looking at basketball fans. It's not a particular demographic specifically. And from day one, when our current owner, Tony Ressler, came on board, he said, we exist to serve our community before anything else. We are a civic asset before we are a basketball team. So it's how do we open up our doors when, people have needs? And they have lived up to this. It's almost 10 years now they've been owners of this team. And it has been a phenomenal experience in working with them because they genuinely mean it. And when your personal values can align with your organization from the owner to the CEO on down, I don't feel like it's a push or pull. We always do what the right thing to do is. So even, during COVID, we were the first team to open up our doors for voting based on the election challenges we had here in Atlanta. And it was amazing having employees be willing to risk themselves and their health to come out and help volunteer. They were passionate about it. Our audience is passionate about it. I've had people tell me they became season ticket members based on our MLK uniform, based on what we did around voting, based on partnering with Gooder and giving back to the community and stuff we're doing with State Farm now at our Good Neighbor Clubs. There's so many different elements, but when it's in the DNA of your organization, regardless of the fans, the fans are also appreciative of the work that we do. But, from a marketing standpoint, everyone says they want community, but if you go on social, it's the lowest performing content. So it's it's a double edge. It's the right thing to say, but for us, it's the right thing to do. And we build programs that are impactful, don't just cut checks.
I always say, REVOLT is not just a media company, it's an engine for transformative change, and I see you doing that work, and I salute you, Queen.
Thank you.
As we get ready to get out of here, I'm gonna have two more questions for you. One, such an amazing story. What is next? What's next for Melissa Proctor? What are you thinking about? What are you dreaming about?
It's a great question. I am always thinking of stuff and dreaming of stuff. I have a good friend of mine that, wants to create a wellness center. And so, thinking of how do we help people's health, especially within our community, over time and help people live as healthy as they can for as long as they can. And so I'm thinking of doing some stuff in that space. But, the reality is I talked about my guiding principles. I weigh that every time. And people hit me up all the time for different opportunities. And for me, being happy in life, I tell my daughter, the only thing constant in life is change.
Amen.
So I know it's coming, ultimately, but I am not running away to anything because I still feel there's so much work to be done here in Atlanta and impact we can have with the community and globally with the Hawks. I mean, the biggest export out of Atlanta is culture. And it's great to be in a team and in a position where we can really take that culture and harness it and share it, not just with Atlanta, but with the world. And so I enjoy that. So for me, I didn't know that I'd be in this seat. And I think I always tell people I go wherever God leads me. And to date, it hasn't failed me yet. And so that's going to be how we continue.
And I love that you're teaching your daughter, talking to your daughter about change. I think the change is not just inevitable. The speed of change right now is so crazy, right? We've got robots in our houses, right? We've got, Trump stepping into this presidency. In his first week after he was elected, he announced 5 things, right? If he's changing not one thing at a time, 10, 20, 30, 40, the speed of change is so incredible. And so those people who are resilient able to sit in change, understand change, and then figure out where they want to go, I think are going to be well prepared for the season that's ahead of us. Okay, you dropped so much wisdom. You gave us so many gems. Before we get out of here, any final words for our audience?
Final words for the audience. I would just say, for me, I talk about the power of guiding principles and what that is. Especially at this stage in my career, I had a lot of people reaching out and say, hey, will you be my mentor? Can you help me? The one thing I always try to leave, especially with young people, as they're, looking up to folks, trying to reach out to people, networking, always try to find a way to be an asset to people, not a liability on their time. And it's something that no one taught me, and I kind of figured it out throughout my career. But if you get the chance to get 30 minutes with anybody, it's like, don't just ask them to pour into you. Ask the question, what's keeping you up at night? What are your challenges? What do you need? And then find a way to solve that, because the people who do that are the ones that stand out from the crowd.
I hear and take all of that advice. You are not just someone who's talking that talk, but your entire story shows that you have walked that talk, your entire journey. Thank you for coming here and adding value. Thank you for coming here and contributing to the amazing work that we do here at REVOLT. I'm so honored and grateful to have you. Looking forward to whatever we can do together, right? I think we're here. This is step one of how REVOLT and the Atlanta Hawks start to think about how we could potentially do work. It's step one of how Melissa Proctor and REVOLT start to think about how we can do work together. So thank you for being here. Had a phenomenal time. Thank you, Queen.
Man, I appreciate you. Thank you for all the work that you do as well.
Of course. What an incredible conversation with Melissa Proctor, CMO of the Atlanta Hawks. Her story has so many lessons, so many insights for us. One of my favorite things that she talked about, one of the favorite lessons that I pulled out, is this whole idea of dreaming without limitations. Very early on in her childhood, she sets her dreams on becoming the first woman, female coach in the NBA. This is someone who's never played a game of basketball before, never coached basketball before, never even stepped foot in a basketball stadium. And so not allowing her reality to define her dreams is such an incredible thing. And I think, I always tell people, you want to know what you can accomplish, you want to know what you can be, show me the size of your dreams. If you dream small things, you're gonna accomplish small things. If you dream big things, it's the only way you give yourself the chance or the opportunity to accomplish those things that are great. And I don't even find it problematic that she never reaches that dream, because so often our dreams are just to set us on a path, right? And so the end goal wasn't actually to be a coach. The end goal was to be the first Black woman CMO of the Atlanta Hawks, but she never gets there if she doesn't start out with the first dream. And so just love this idea of dreaming without limitations and seeing where it leads you. The other thing that I love about Melissa's story is there's this beautiful thread about not being afraid of the unknown. She comes from Miami, Caribbean background, first generation American born, steps into Wake Forest, which is a very different and unique experience for her. We see her do that as she steps into TNT, right? A world that she doesn't know or doesn't necessarily understand. We also see that she gets laid off from TNT, I believe, as a mother who is 8 months pregnant. And so you consistently see her stepping into situations where she has no clue what is in front of her, but doing it with a quiet confidence. Oftentimes that confidence is rooted in her faith. And I just think that that is such an important lesson for us all to take. The world is changing so much around us every single day. And if we can find ways to be at peace with the unknown, to be comfortable with the unknown. And the truth is, when we are in the unknown, it is often a very uncomfortable situation. And it is in moments of being uncomfortable that we get to grow, that we get to evolve, and we get forced to become the people that we were supposed to be anyways. And then the last idea that I want to talk about that was really exciting to me in our conversation was this notion of always finding a way to demonstrate value. She does this as a young ball girl, limited in the scope of what she's allowed to do or can do because she's the only woman, right? She can't go into the men's locker room. Yet and still, she still finds ways to add value and demonstrate value far beyond the scope of her job. She talked about it again when she talked about applying for the role at TNT and the resume that she submitted. It wasn't a regular resume like everybody else. She demonstrated all the value that she could bring to the table through the work product that she submitted to them. So so much so that they come back and say, if you can sell us on you like this, then we trust you to be able to sell our brand to our audience. And those was also her final words as she kind of closed out our conversation, which is to say, always remember to be an asset in the room. And so I love that idea. I love that idea that no matter how big the job, no matter how small the job, no matter how big the role or small the role, we can always find ways to add value and demonstrate value for the work that we're doing.